Hello everyone, it's Gigabeef here, and today I'm going to show you how to manage your stash in the early wipe. How you approach this will depend dramatically on the game version that you have. One of the biggest differences between Standard and Edge of Darkness is the stash size, with all stashes being 10 squares wide, but a standard stash having 28 rows, which is down to here. The two middle editions have 38 and 48 rows, which is to here and here, but EOD is the biggest by a mile with 10 by 68, making it over twice the size of a standard stash. This obviously makes the game easier early on because without the flea market or traders above level 1, we constantly have to choose what to keep and what to sell. If you are on standard, something important to remember for later on is that the stash 4 upgrade is very rarely worthwhile, as typically the cost per slot is worse than item cases, which you can use instead to increase your storage. So to start with, we spend a lot of time in the stash and especially at the start of the wipe, so efficient navigation is key. Control left click is the most important of all of them, which shifts items from your player to your stash and vice versa. Depending on what item this is, it will depend on where it goes. Bullets, mags, grenades and that kind of thing will transfer into your rig, and other items will go into the bag instead as priority. This functionality is the reason why after the early game I tend to keep my cases and all my stuff at the bottom of the stash and leave a space clear at the top, so after finishing raids the loot can be quickly control clicked out of your player into the empty section for sorting. Next we have the Alt left click. This places items onto your player's body. This is useful for gearing up or for shifting weapons and rigs out of the way temporarily whilst doing other things. One other function to be aware of is the Shift left click, which has its use in the sorting table. This is a relatively recent addition which gives you a ton more temporary space to sort your stuff out, preventing the problem of the number slide puzzle where you have so little room it becomes extremely difficult to do anything. You can expand the size of the sorting table by dragging items into the bottom right corner, and with this open, Shift click places items from either your player or your stash into the table itself. From here you can either move things out manually, or alternatively just by closing the table it places all of the items that was in it at the top of the stash itself, as if you'd control click them out one by one. This can be especially useful if you want to clear out a container, for example, such as using a scav junk box that has items inside for the scav case hideout upgrade. One of the best parts about the sorting table is that you can use it after scav runs too now, allowing you to cram your stash just that little bit more full without leaving anything behind. On that note, while I do appreciate that it is difficult on a standard stash, I do recommend leaving at least a small space of a couple of rows at the top when going on scav runs, because otherwise you'll spend a lot more time trying to keep everything after a really successful raid. Alright, so with all of that said, let's dig into the space saving tips. Weapons are usually the primary candidate for taking up too much room, so generally speaking, removing the magazine and the pistol grip will change the weapon from 2 squares high to 1 slot instead. Some guns, like the MP5, even nest down into 1 slot simply by taking out the magazine. Middle clicking on weapons with folding stocks will remove another square on the right hand side, although you have to make sure that there aren't any mods that will prevent this from working, such as butt pads or dovetail mounts and scopes. If you want to really squeeze out every last cell, selling all of the magazines that you aren't imminently about to use that are purchasable from the traders, like 545 30 rounders, as well as the basic pistol grips, is another way to cheaply maximize your storage. This means that for a lot of typical weapons, you'll be left with a 4 slot gun that was 10 previously, and when you want to use it, just do a linked search and buy a pistol grip and a magazine at the time. It's almost always more space efficient to keep ammo as loose stacks rather than in magazines, unless you have a really special one that you want to keep, such as a drum mag, and this wipe, if you navigate to your profile on the Escape from Tarkov website and accept the New Year's gift there, along with the AUG you get an ammo box. This is actually a massive quality of life improvement so early into a patch, and keeps the majority of your ammo stash in a neat 2x2 square. A very important element about ammo management is the find in raid status on the bullets. Ever since the introduction of the magazine loading menu, I actually rarely go hunting for ammunition directly in my stash anymore, and I use that instead. For example, if I want to stack a 545 mag half and half with PS and BT, I will first fill the mag with each and unload them to automatically find them in my stash. Then I'll split the ammo stack with Control left click and drag one into a stack of 15, the one that you want to go underneath. From here we'll top off the magazine with BT, because those will fire first, and then typically I'll use the remainder in my secure container as loose ammo, topping up both with the menu. But the issue here is that if the ammo in your stash has the find in raid tag, and the ammo in your container or magazine is not find in raid, the game will refuse to pull the extra ammunition into your character. The reason for this is so as to not inadvertently overwrite the find in raid tag, but most of the time good ammo can't be sold on the fleet anyway, and lower grade ammo normally isn't worth selling. I try to remove as many of the find in raid tags from my bullets as possible for this reason by stacking non-find in raid ammo on top of find in raid until the flag goes away. Next up, let's quickly look at selling to traders. Typically, you want to sell to Ragman first, then Therapist and Jaeger, and then Mechanic, and finally anyone who will take it to maximize your rubles with Fence in a certain last place. Sometimes you will find scav weapons with low durability. These are normally under 60 that the regular traders will not take. But in order to maximize the amount of money that you make, it's important to remember that the durability only applies to the lower of the weapon, i.e. the red base section after taking all of the other mods off. If you just sell the whole thing to Fence, you're missing out on all the extra money that could have been gotten by using the disassemble function and selling all the other pieces to Mechanic and finally just the lower section to Fence. Alright, so we've minimized the amount of space our existing items take up, but clearly we want to keep a lot of stuff for quests, the hideout, or just selling on the flea when we get to level 15. On this basis, your first goal should be getting a scav junk box, which is an enormous 14 by 14 case that holds 196 slots worth for a mere 4x4 in your own stash. This costs just over 1.1 million rubles from Therapist level 1, but it's definitely worth getting when you can, as you'll need a ton of these barter items as you progress through Tarkov. It even holds dog tags. In the early days, there are a lot of demands on your money, and at this current time we haven't got everything mapped out for patch 13 yet, but there are some items that probably won't be necessary straight away, like Geiger counters, Cyclone batteries, and pipe grip wrenches that sell for decent money to Therapist. For each item, just make sure to check the wiki and make a judgment call about the barters, crafts, or upgrades that the item helps with as to whether you're comfortable selling them now or not at this stage, because you'll need them very soon. Personally, I keep pretty much anything for quests and level 1 and 2 of the hideout modules for sure. After this, we have the flea market, so we can buy some of the things that we need, even if it's a bit expensive. Check the wiki quest page linked in the description, as this has a few image guides of finding raid items. There are probably some more changes again this wipe, but the early stuff seems very similar for the most part at the moment. Same goes for streamer items. If you're not intending on getting the Kappa container, which is really only achievable for very experienced and dedicated players, you can also safely sell these too, which nets a decent amount of money and also saves some space in your junk box. Also, rather than storing fuel cans in the junk box, once you have the generator up in the hideout, you can keep the cans in there and just turn off the power to save some extra room in your main stash too. So either before or at the same time as using the junk box, we can store items in bags and rigs as well to varying effectiveness. The classic Tarkov bag stacking allows you to hold these in a very efficient way by simply stacking them inside each other, and at the bottom you'll have a space for storage. Usually I put things in there that I'm not going to need imminently because it's a real pain to go through the whole stack to get to the bottom. For rigs, there are many that decently hold more than what they take up in the stash, the CSA being one of the easiest to access as it's on Ragman 1 and holds 10 slots whilst only taking up 6, and is found fairly often on scavs too. There's a list of all the rigs in the game on the wiki, which I'll link to in the description. Sort this by the efficiency column and that will show you the effective slot multiplying power of all of the armoured and unarmoured rigs in the game. One final piece that can help to amplify your stash space by quite a decent margin is using insurance cleverly. Coined by someone else as the Prapple stash, you get a couple of days to take this stuff out, so in the meanwhile it can just be left in there rather than clogging up your main hideout. Obviously you have to keep an eye out on the timings, and if you forget to take them out then you do risk losing the items, but that's the price that you pay for trying to eke out every last advantage on space. Not that I really recommend this, but Therapist Insurance actually does give you more time to collect your items, closer to a week rather than 3 to 4 days, so if you really need to push out that timer then it could be an option. Just remember that Therapist Insurance costs more than Prapples, which is why basically nobody does it. So next, go and check out my video on the best weapons to use at level 1 traders, as patch 13 has made some changes to shake up the early game a bit from last time. Otherwise, as usual, a big shout out to all my patrons, hit all the buttons if you enjoyed the video, and as always, have fun in your raids.